Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this October 28th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, I was off the air the last couple days due to the fact that my dog who's been with my dog, Miss Moose, I have two dogs. People who followed my show have listened to them bark number of times during the show, and she's resting comfortably now, still at the vet, and she had a serious operation done on what was found to be a cancerous growth on her chest. So, there's a lot of people to pray for, but, in your heart, if you have a few moments, say a couple prayers for her, because she's been actually a really good friend of mine for years, and she understands probably the Vatican-led New World Order better than a lot of people. But one thing I wanted to say was when I was in Texas, and I was working for RBN at the time, Republic Broadcasting Network, and they kicked me off for talking about the Vatican. During that period of time when I was there near Austin, I was living way out in the country, and I noticed that I was starting to get, I mentioned this on one of my shows before, what is called gang stalking, or you get these weird people coming up to your door, etc., to frighten you. Then you get people driving by in trucks in an area that they shouldn't be because it was way out in the country. And I remember one time I left my house and my dog, Miss Moose, was on the porch, and there was no sharp objects or anything. When I came home, I found that she had a knife wound on her chest of over 60 stitches. So she's paid the price probably more than I have. So say a couple prayers for her, and I got the report on the vet, and she's going to be fine. So anyway, let me just get that off the table why I've been gone the last couple of days. Well, today I have Bert Krantz from the Alamo ministry on my show, one of my favorite guests over the years. And the reason he is because he's a man that didn't compromise his principles and give up a friendship due to the Vatican-led New World Order assault on his Christian ministry. And just to recap, the Alamo ministry had been around for, 40 to 50 years, and they had not pulled any punches when it came to the Vatican-led New World Order and what it's really all about. And through those years, they've been persecuted many, many times, and the final nail was put in the coffin in 2008 when there was a huge, it was an incredible SWAT team raid on their ministry. And, the kids were playing on the swings and the guns were blazing. And from that point on, it went downhill. I mean, this has been a story I covered for years. But when this thing hit in 2008, I really decided to go to it and look at it in earnest, because I don't believe, let's just say this, my experience as a journalist and as in the law, working in the law profession for a number of years, taught me one thing. I don't believe anything that comes out of the mouth of the high-level government officials, and I don't believe anything that comes out of the mouth of anything out of Rome. And so, despite all of the news stories that basically let people think that it's always the Tony Alamo compound, they were a cult, etc., etc. Well, Bert paid the ultimate price and had his children taken away when that was the second prong approach they used. First, they put the pastor, Tony Alamo, in jail for 175 years on bogus charges, and you can go back and catch my shows on that. And secondly, then they decided to take away the children, saying they were victims of abuse. However, when you looked at the court cases, there was no abuse. But still, the government pursued, and to this day, 2015, almost 7 years later, these children have not been returned. And the third prong approach we've covered before, and I'm going over some court documents now on certain cases, but they're trying to take away their property. And in that, they say that the church members have no rights. They're not even considered human beings. And Bert Krantz has seen all of these three things occur to him in his life, which turned it upside down. And I wanted, Bert, could you comment a bit about it just in general now? again so people really understand what you went through?
Well, sure, Greg. First, thanks for having me on again. And one thing that you said that I would disagree with is that anything they did in 2008 was a final nail in any coffin, because they certainly can't destroy any work that God does. In fact, Gamaliel, the wise counselor in the Sanhedrin, when they began to persecute the apostles, he's told them, look, if this work is of God, you can't fight against it. And if it's not, it'll go away. So, don't fight against it, lest haply you be found to fight against God. And people don't realize that when they fight against people that are serving the Lord, that they're fighting against God. They're fighting against the people of God, and that is very offensive to God. And the persecution, it stings. You read about it, and I've known about that it would happen from the time I became saved. The Bible says that we would be hated of all men, that we would be dragged into courts, that we'd be dragged before governors, that we would be jailed, that our actual families would come against us. The Bible, that's right in the book of Matthew. It's in the Gospels. And yet, as you live your Christian life and the Lord prepares you for, what your ministry is as you grow in the Lord, you can't feel the pain of what it actually is when you go through it. It's one thing to learn about it and to know about it and sing about it and preach about it, and then it's another thing to live it. And the events from 2008, I still live with them every day, as you probably can imagine. And but I have something that cannot be taken away from me, and that is that the Lord Jesus Christ called me into ministry. They call it, and they even have a name for it in the Catholic Church, where they say, or the Catholic institution, where they think people are going to become priests. They say, do you have a vocation? And that's a calling from God. And so they call it that, but of course we know that people that become priests, people that become ministers, many of them think of it as a career. But it's not a career with me. God called me into ministry, and there's no man that can take me out of it. And that's what the courts and the government of Arkansas attempted to do when they tried to make deals with me and actually did steal my children, and then terminated my parental rights, forced me into bringing just lawsuits against the state and appealing my case to the Supreme Court twice. And this was a very painful experience, and it still is painful. But the pain, the infirmities that are endured in these moments of time, I know the Lord is with me. He's in me. And so knowing this, I can't fear anything. I don't fear anything, because the joy will come soon enough. This life is very short, and I know that very soon this whole world's going to be over, and nobody's going to care about the little bit of persecution that I suffered, or that anyone suffered on this side. What's going to matter is, where are we going to spend eternity?
Yeah, I stand corrected on that statement I made. And the thing I wanted to get, but anyway, here's that deal. Talk about this deal they offered you, and this shows you really the corruption firsthand, what was going on in your case and the ministry case. Go ahead.
The deal that happened, the FBI, the official in the FBI that was controlling the situation, really at every level, or up to his level, of course, in the Texarkana area. He was at every court case regarding the abduction of my children and the stealing by the state. And he, through my attorney, made me an offer. First of all, he prefaced it by bringing a bunch of slanderous things to me that had been testified to, that should have softened, maybe they thought would soften me up towards the plan, and saying, oh, these things are real bad. Now, if you can help us in any way to prosecute Pastor Alamo, you can have your children back in a week. And first off, with the different slanderous things that they told me about, I says, well, I don't know anything about those things you're telling me about, and I don't have any information that would help prosecute Pastor Alamo. Everything I know about Pastor Alamo, he's done nothing but help me or any of the people that I know of that he's dealt with. That's his goal in life, is to bring people to the Lord. And so I really, as much as I would have liked to done anything to get my children back in a week, that was a very enticing offer. But to compromise to the point where I'm lying and condemning not only my own self, but then bringing that testimony before my children and a lot of people might think that's great that you would lie to get your children back, but that's not a great thing to betray a minister of God, a man of God that has done nothing but good, and to condemn him to. That's not some place I want to be. That's like what Judas Iscariot did. And so I couldn't go there. And as a result, well, they did terminate my rights, and they did keep my children, adopted them out. Thank God my sister got them. But I know now they're going to public schools. They're being trained up, indoctrinated in how to fornicate, to evolution and abortion and all the different doctrines of the world that are acceptable, homosexuality, they're being indoctrinated into these things and alienated further from their God-given parents. That's another thing that the state has down to a science, is how to alienate children from their parents. They make the separation and they get right in the middle to make sure it's against the law for the children to even contact the parents, for the parents to contact the children.
Yeah, Bert, there's one thing
they work on the children through their counselors and psychologists and educational system and all the different venues that they have.
One thing I wanted to get your comments on that I didn't do last time you were on, and that was to bring up a story regarding a Georgia state senator who was, I believe, murdered in 2010. Her name was Nancy Schaefer, and she was an advocate to change this system of what's going on in DHS and how they make it so easy just to get children on into state custody, and they're doing it for money. Can you, I know you know about her story, tell us a little bit about her and also how this relates to you personally.
Well, I have no doubt in my mind that she was murdered, her and her husband. And she was actually working on a book, and I believe the transcripts of that disappeared. So she was a Georgia state senator, and she was studying, or she did what do they call that, investigation on DHS, had thousands of people interviewed that had the DHS or the CPS, whatever they call them in that particular state, steal their children. And she heard such horror stories that she did the investigation. And in the investigation, she came to the conclusion that there was nothing that could be done to help CPS or DHS or this government agency that was stealing children. It had to be torn down. There's no need for it in the first place. If there's abuse going on, or if there are authorities that can investigate these things. There are laws that already exist. You don't have to have people going in and creating situations to where they have so many regulations and such and accumulative government. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Go ahead. If I stop, just go ahead. I had a little interruption on the connection, but go right ahead.
Okay, well, the government's answer to any problems that ever arise in these agencies is always to throw more money at it, to give it more money. Well, she found out, of course, that there's bonuses given for children stolen from their parents. Federal government, that it's all intertwined. It's not just the state agencies, but the federal government bonuses and incentives for them to get more children creates it's just a monster that grows, and it requires more and more children. And she was a great threat to this because she had a very loud voice, and she was very adamant that this needed to be stopped. A good Christian lady and really a hero. And so they murdered her. What can you say? You can do the research on it yourself and just look at the circumstances. Of course, if you look up any of the news reports or media, mainstream media accounts of her death, yeah, they say it was a suicide. But if you really look into what she was standing behind and what she was doing, you know that she was murdered.
Yeah, and she found this not only to be in her, this problem in her state, but nationwide. And I think she made a statement that the system can't be corrected; it has to be dismantled. And when she was finding all these examples of cases where kids were taken without proof of any type of abuse, and basically because of the federal incentives passed by the Clinton Act that basically offers financial incentives for the more children you put into custody. And it leads to a serious amount of corruption, don't you think?
Yes, and to add to that, the very system itself of how that they prosecute, and they would say they're not prosecuting, they'd say that, well, we're not accusing you of any crime, we're just saying that your children are neglected. But then they hold this private or secret case where there is no jury, there's no media allowed, it's all secret. It's like a secret court, just like Nazi Germany. And then the judge, I know both judges in my case were former DHS employees and or DHS prosecutors, and the CASA workers. That's called court-appointed special advocates for the children. They work hand in glove, hand in hand with the DHS. The counselors are all former DHS, or any kind of psychologist or psychiatrist, any kind of medical stuff. It's all interlinked into one big system, and everybody is milking it for the money. And she found all this out, and then the whole system, it goes even beyond what you see in the DHS into the court system, and it's just about as wicked as it could get.
Now, the one thing I was going to ask you regarding Nancy Schaefer is, when I looked at her case, I looked at this and I said, wow, how many kids are actually across the country being kidnapped? And it's a credible amount of kids. And I wondered, in your particular case, if you would have lied about Tony Alamo, do you think that they would have given your kids back to you? Or do you think that they were just using that as a smokescreen?
I believe that if I had perjured myself to a good enough degree to where they were happy and they felt like that I had betrayed the body of Christ, they probably would have given me the children back, because really the spirit of Satan is driving the whole force, and he would know, if he would understand that this guy's blaspheming the Holy Spirit, he can have his kids back, because he'll just bring them up as good blasphemers of the Holy Spirit also.
When I was looking at this, go ahead.
But then on the other hand, if I tried to be cagey about it, or just pretend or something like that, no, that wouldn't. In the first place, it wouldn't have done me any good. And in the second place, they also would have realized that and drawn me further and further into the web until they felt that they really had me in their pocket.
Now, just to switch gears here a bit, to concentrate on Tony's trial, you were there when it occurred. Tell us some of the major irregularities of that case that they had, that they had with him, and how he was railroaded into jail.
Well, one of the main irregularities was the question that the jury posed to the judge, and of course that was they couldn't find any case or any evidence of any of these crimes perpetrated from any of the testimony. They didn't find any real evidence. Could they still convict? So it showed that the government had put on a slanderous enough campaign for them to want to convict Tony, but they couldn't find enough evidence, and didn't feel like they really had the evidence. And the judge of course, didn't instruct them that if they didn't have the evidence, they couldn't convict on it. See, so.
So they were saying, basically they're saying, even if he's innocent, can we still convict him?
Basically, yeah, that's the way it went. Yeah, because they had generated enough hatred against Pastor Alamo with the slanderous campaign that they brought at the trial.
Now, what about his... Go ahead.
Added to that, we had the same FBI agent that had, like I said, he was in control. He's the one that had done the investigation, and he'd rounded up these different people. He'd arranged for them, or the different witnesses against Tony, he'd arranged for them to be brought to Wellspring and conditioned and programmed to speak with one voice as a choir in harmony against Pastor Alamo, and they orchestrated a great thing. And he was sitting in the courtroom directly in front of the witness stand, out by the rail, the outer rail of the bench, but facing the witness, to where the gallery couldn't see what he was doing, but you could see him. You could see him nodding yes or no whenever a yes or no question was asked of the witnesses, and he was, just guiding them through their witness, and our attorneys never objected to that, or Pastor Alamo's attorneys never objected to that.
Yeah,
these are irregulars.
And from your point of view, I looked at this case and I said, well, where are all the witnesses on his behalf that I even talked to? And none of them had an opportunity to speak at the trial. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's another point, is that, of course, then when they stole all the children that they did, all the members of the church, all the congregation that still had children that had gotten away, they were hiding out. They had gone undercover so that their children wouldn't be stolen. So any of those people that would have testified for Pastor Alamo, they were afraid to come out. And those that did, there was two brave souls that came into the courtroom that had children that were in hiding. And the first thing they asked when they get on the witness stand, where are your children? And when they wouldn't answer, of course, they disqualified them. They pled the Fifth Amendment, so they disqualified them as witnesses right in front of the jury. And this was an error that couldn't be corrected. So the case should have been thrown out just on that one point.
Yeah, and the real interesting thing about this, if they had real evidence against Pastor Alamo, they wouldn't have used the Mann Act as an easy way to convict. And the Mann Act basically is kind of it's an old law put on the books, and it was there to discourage pimps from taking prostitutes across state lines, and to protect the women. And they use this as kind of well, if you really did commit rape, then charge them with that. If you really did commit those abuse charges, charge them directly. But they didn't. And that's an interesting case. Go ahead.
That's a very good point, Greg, that they brought the Mann Act charges and then they convicted him of rape, basically. So that's what they did, and that's really the way that it came across. They're using the Mann Act, which also makes it a federal case. So
exactly. Hey, Bert, let's pick up right there. We got to take a break. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
All right.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour on the Investigative Journal. My guest is Bert Krantz. He's a member of the Alamo Ministry, and we were going over some things regarding the case against him and also the case against Pastor Alamo, who now sits still in jail after 175 years. By the way, Bert, how is he doing lately? Have you had a chance to follow up? He's been there quite a while now.
He is, of course, 81 now, and his health, he's been having a lot of health problems, but he's very high in the Spirit of the Lord. We just received a message from him that he emailed, and I'd like to read it to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
At least a portion of it.
Read the whole thing if you'd like. Go ahead. Yeah, go on.
The infirmities that I endure will last for but a moment, because I know that I am in the Lord and he is in me. Knowing this, I fear not, because joy will come soon enough. Did he not say that he would never leave us nor forsake us? Will he cast on us more than we can bear? No. I trust him completely and will obey him always. To worry about anything is a sign of distrust. Therefore, I shall not worry. I will remain steadfast, finding my strength and joy in him, casting all of my cares on him who is able to sustain me. Believe with your whole heart, knowing that he hears your prayers. You say that you don't know how I deal with the day-to-day pressures that I face. I can't imagine how you deal with not finding joy in everything that the Lord does and provides us with. Don't fret over the time of trouble. Rather rejoice, because we know that the Lord our God is faithful. He can do exceeding and abundantly more than one could ever begin to ask or expect. God will make sure that I get out of here in his time.
Yeah, it's quite a statement, and I think if you reflect on it a bit, all of our little worries pale in comparison to really what he's going through. And it seems,
That's right.
I think the key statement is that the Lord never gives us more than we can handle, and certain people can handle more than others, basically, and each in our own way either finds him or doesn't, and that's really boils down to the truth. And I thought, what we could do here for a moment, and Bert will come on my show again, because we always like to keep track of what's happening with the ministry, and also to act more or less as a beacon for others out there who wonder really what's going on in this world. Why are we in the position we're in? What's happening to the rights of Americans? And where are these rights being, who is behind what we do call the Vatican-led New World Order? And I thought what we could do for a few moments here is turn the tables a little bit, because I've been following this case for a number of years as a journalist, as basically, I wish I could have, if I was in law school during the time, I would have written a law review on the case, because it is to me a travesty of justice at the highest level, and it involves corruption from the courts. And my statement when I make this, I always say the most endangered species in this world is an honest judge. And Bert, I thought we turn the tables, because there's a lot of people out there who are always asking me questions about what kind of response do I get to your story, how did I decide to cover it, and why do I spend time on it? And I thought you may have some questions, and in turn, you may ask some questions that people are always asking me, and they'll get an idea of why, as a third party looking at this case, I am stating that, one, Tony was railroaded in jail, your children were illegally taken from you, and your property is now being illegally taken from you. Go ahead, maybe you have some questions, and we could just turn the tables a bit, and you get on the other side of the mic.
Well, Greg, you probably are the one person that has most thoroughly researched this that I know of in any media outlet, and so you really do have more of an inside knowledge of our case than any of the people that are spouting off the rose fertilizer that we are hearing as news and as being brought to us. That is nothing more than slander and lies. And so for the layman that's looking at this case, say an unsaved, or even someone that's saved, but they're just not mature in the Lord, and they don't maybe they don't know the scriptures, or someone that is a professing Christian and thinks they're a Christian. Any layman that doesn't have the kind of experience that you have, to just look at the case, say they Google it or anything like that, and they come across just all the garbage and slander that's in there. What advice, how would you direct them to really cut through that and to come to the realizations that you have come to get the picture that you have with all of this clutter? I know that a simple answer would be to go to Pastor Alamo's website and to just read the other side right there. The material is right there to see. But a lot of people are going to say, well, Tony Alamo's just tooting his own horn, or, it's self-aggrandizing. But this, this not being the case, and you having, knowing that, what advice would you give to somebody that really wanted to research this?
Well, here's what I have to say first, is that when you research a case like this, you have to realize, now I'm just giving advice to people out there. First of all, you have a belief system, and in a sense, that belief system acts as your hidden agenda that you won't admit most of the time. And most of us don't want to deal with the truth about ourselves to begin with. Now, if you're going to look at this case, you're going to have to wipe away any of that, and you're going to have to act basically as a disinterested or an interested third party looking at the irregularities and looking at the truths on both sides of the coin, so that you can actually take this case and not interject your belief system. And what I mean by that is, if you're not a fundamental Christian, if you're an atheist, if you're a Buddhist, if you're a Hindu, if you're a Catholic or whatever, you're going to have to, or if you are a fundamental Christian, take all of that and put it aside. Because here's what will happen. If you are a Christian, you're going to automatically say, well, they had to have framed him. Now, the problem is, you don't want to look at the case that way. You want to look at it as a third party that is looking at both sides of the coin. So take my advice. Do it that way. Be a journalist. Take the state's case. Look at how they characterize this ministry. Then look at really what the ministry is all about. Take the time. Okay, and as I'm back, as I was saying, we had a little bit of an interruption, and if I do that throughout the next 15 minutes, it's occasionally you get a sporadic connection on this Skype line. But anyway, that would be my original recommendation, is to really take it from there and try to do your best at wiping away all of your preconceived notions. And don't let your belief system stand in the way. I'm not saying change your belief system, by all means. I'm saying look at this case from both sides. And basically, that's what I did. Now, as a journalist, I had maybe a leg up on a lot of people because that was my job. And I got used to that. I got used to not taking sides on anything and not really believing what I hear in the media all the time. And even though I worked in it, I understood that the media is slanted. I knew it back in the 70s when I worked in it. I saw how stories were not covered. When I was in Rome, and this was the first, I went to Rome as probably an atheist back in 1979 or 80, coming from a Catholic background. And when I went to Italy and worked there, I learned about the Vatican, and I looked at it from a point of view of strictly a secular organization. For years, back in the early 80s, when I was there from 79 to 86, I was strictly looking at them as a secular agency. I didn't care about the religious point of view. I didn't care about Christians. I didn't care about anything. I wanted to find out the truth about what this organization was really like. Now, that gave me a leg up because I understood by having many stories that I try to write about it being cut off by the mainstream media. They wouldn't let me print the stories. I'd had to go to some Italian newspaper or a French newspaper to get a story done. And this was before really the internet came into play. And so I understood the corruption and the highest levels of the Associated Press, the American newspaper in Rome. You can say the same thing about the American newspaper in Paris, funded by the CIA. And working in that kind of microcosm, this small area of the American world, the English world, you would be surprised the number of people you meet who are on the other side of the coin that tell you things. And when I realized the CIA was funding a lot of this stuff and that I couldn't get stories out, I kind of started to just do my own research. And then I would write stories to make a little bit of money, on a travel story, certain things like that, Bert. But my knowledge grew by leaps and bounds of the Vatican. Now, when I came to America, back to the States, I had this story in the back of my mind because I said nobody really covers this and nobody realizes what's going on. So what I did at that point is start looking for people who were talking the truth about the Vatican. And little to my surprise, what I found out was that there were so few people. Most all, and Pastor Alamo included, had Christian ministries. And they enlightened me to the Bible. I had not read it much. In fact, Tony and your organization, without me ever asking you guys or anything, just by covering your story, made me realize that I had to look at the biblical side of this as well. And so that's when I started my research into the Bible and starting maybe reading it for the first time. And I looked at it and I said, this story is not complete unless you look at both the secular and the Christian biblical side of this story and how the Vatican interplays with this. And when I started doing that, it all came together for me. And it was amazing because the research kind of found me after I started looking into the Bible aspects of this, Bert. It was as if, I used to say this on some of my old shows, I had no reason to do this, but outside of looking for the truth, and in turn, it helped me find the truth about myself. So that's kind of what happened to me. And what I found, the more I uncovered when I was in Rome, first uncovering what the Vatican was all about, the more evil I found. And I swear, Bert, it just kept growing. Now, the more I looked into your ministry and other Christian ministries similar to yours, the more truth I found. And when I put the two together, I found that the reason that they came after you was because of your boldness and your unwavering stance at showing the truth about this organization and also the truths that God gave us in the Bible. So does that help a little bit? Get an idea of where I came from?
Certainly that helps with where you came from. And gosh, it'd be hard for the average person to just jet over to Rome and to do the research that you did over there and to have the same experience that you have. But you telling that story, might help with someone that's just looking at this, say, for the first time, or maybe for the first time decided to really take a deeper look into it. And that's absolutely true. I know that you can't put the political ideas or the political facts together without the biblical facts. You have to. It's all together. That's because it's all prophecy.
And that's what kind of separated Tony a bit from others. I met many people along the way would concentrate on the biblical side, but yet not go public with it. I talked to these ecumenical pastors who says, "Oh yeah, we know that Rome's involved, but I don't want to offend anybody in church," that kind of stance. Then I found people in the secular world. Oh yes, Rome is corrupt, but it's only a certain portion of Rome. They had no background in the biblical. So if you have background just in the biblical and not the secular, you're missing. And if you just have knowledge of the secular and you forget the biblical, you're not going to get the whole story. And I found Tony put the two together and was amazing in telling exactly certain things I learned about them in Rome. And that's what made me realize, okay, now I'm going to look at this and say, okay, I have a feeling he's being framed. And as I started interviewing people, government agents who were actually left the FBI, there were informants that left, undercover agents that can quickly that left the agency, but then the agency can disavow ever knowing them. They told me the truth about how they were trying to set him up and you guys up. Then I looked at all the periphery things, everything, how the media portrayed you guys. And you go on the internet today, and it's still the Tony Alamo campaign. They still put on these bogus interviews with CNN and all this stuff to make him look as if he's a pedophile, look as if he's a child abuser. And that's as far as people go. And it's a really big mistake, because what you're doing is you're never going to get an idea of what's really going on in your own government and what's really going on behind what the Pope's visit was just recently. What an example, isn't it? To show you his power as it came right before the American Congress, as it came before not only the ambassadors at the United Nations, but all the world leaders were ordered to assemble. That's the first time in the history of that organization that a pope spoke to all the world leaders, not just the ambassadors like other popes had done. That's an interesting story, isn't it, Bert?
Yes, it is, and it does show the accumulation or the buildup of this New World Order, Vatican-led New World Order, as you've coined, and the actual beast government. And one thing you mentioned as you were just speaking about the federal government agents that could and would have testified on Pastor Alamo's behalf, but become disavowed from their agencies, and their credibility would be gone because they'd bring in counter witnesses saying, well, this person must be a forger, and they could actually charge him with perjury and imprison him.
Exactly.
Do you follow that?
Yeah. And
one thing I'd like to mention that you led to when you said that is, as we were speaking just before the break, how they they charged Pastor Alamo with the Mann Act case.
Right.
The Mann Act, and then they brought forth a trial as if it was a rape trial or an abuse trial, and all the witnesses came on with these sad stories that they'd been abused or raped or whatever, and then the jury says, well, we don't see any evidence of this, and the judge doesn't instruct them that if there's no evidence they can't convict, because they didn't need evidence. It wasn't a rape charge, it was the Mann Act, so they didn't need the forensic evidence. Now, Pastor Alamo, the room where he slept, they went and tore that thing to shreds looking for forensic evidence. His bus that he traveled on, where much of this abuse was supposed to have been perpetrated, they tore it to ribbons looking for forensic evidence. Now, Greg, scientists claim to have DNA from dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And yet they couldn't find in a confined space of his bedroom and the bus where these crimes were supposed to take care of. They couldn't find one molecule of DNA that proved their case.
Yeah, exactly. And it just goes to show you he's convicted without any evidence of the crime that he was accused of, really. And that's what got me really involved in this, when I started seeing the corruption at the court trial. And I said to myself, my God, what kind of we claim to have the fairest justice system in the world, but if it actually, what I've learned about our justice system is at the lower levels, or certain little cases, you can get some justice, but when it reaches this point, when it starts talking about the higher level officials, when it starts talking about the Vatican, case after case after case I've seen get thrown out of court. Another one, the Vatican being sued. You would not believe, Bert, when you start looking at the cases that have been filed against this organization and how it just gets swept under the rug. It's incredible. I've done a show just on 5 or 6 big cases involving insurance fraud, involving genocide, involving all kinds of things, where the courts will just turn a blind eye and say, well, they don't do business here. They don't do business here. Give me a break. And I also just recently found a CNN transcript of an interview they did with Tony. And this was after this was, I think, before the trial or right after it or whatever. And this guy was talking to Tony, and Tony tried to bring up the Vatican and said a few things that we say in the show all the time. And this CNN reporter said, we cannot go there. This is not, we're going to offend too many, and Tony's looking at him going, what do you mean we can't go there? And this is what the CNN is all about. They will not deal with these subjects. The courts, the federal court in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit, they won't deal. I mean, I saw evidence of a case against the Vatican and genocide in World War II and the genocide of Croatia, where there was deposition documents from diplomats pinning the Vatican right to the wall on not only stealing gold and taking it through the Vatican rat lines and into banks, but also being involved firsthand with the murder of these people, priests. But they said this was not, they don't do business in America, so they just dropped the case on technicalities. That's what we're up against. And Tony's case shows you, when we start talking about things like this, how they will accuse you, Bert, and others of doing exactly what they do. And they get a free ride all the way to the bank, right?
Yes, and if you pursue their crimes beyond the point where you're talking about, say, for instance, the crimes of the Vatican with that Jewish gold and the murders, the many murders, and they get thrown out of court, if you find some angle to pursue that further or harder, you're either dead or destroyed. Or if those CNN reporters mention it, they don't have a job anymore. If their higher-ups let it go through, they're dead or destroyed one way or the other.
Exactly, and I can tell you as a first-hand journalist that this exists. You go with a story like this to the editor, you will not get it published. You will not work again, and there's no way I can work in a mainstream paper anymore. And I'm glad, because I wouldn't want to. But that's the point. This story is taboo, and your ministry is an example of how they wanted to shut you guys up for mainly trying to alert people of this problem, sending out millions of brochures all over the world, getting a huge response on your website of over 300,000 hits a week. They had to put an end to this if they wanted their New World Order to come to fruition. Well, Bert, listen, thanks for the questions. We're all out of time, and we'll have you back again. See you later, Bert.
Thanks, Greg. All right, bye.